I just noticed the other day a quite fascinating remark from former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, who was, when Prime Minister strongly opposed, said this will be a third chamber in the Parliament, is now one senses reluctantly saying he'd support it. But he said this only a couple of weeks ago. So I think the government is sort of stuck with the position they're in, and there's a very sincere, calculated, intelligent, informed view among the Yes campaign that the more detail you have, the more likely it is that it'll go down. I have an immense problem with that. That is to effectively say that you should not allow the punters to have too much information about this because it's not what they think it is.
Yeah.
And they'll vote against it.
Yeah. I think it's memories of what happened with the Republic referendum that may even be affecting Mr Turnbull, or anybody asking, how do you get a constitutional referendum up? I think there's this view that could be taken that the Republic referendum failed because there was so much detail and because people knew exactly what was being proposed and could see how it would work. And you had a divided electorate between three groups. You had the monarchists on one hand, who just didn't want a republic. You had those who wanted a republic where you would directly elect the president, and you had a more minimal republic that would maintain our parliamentary system and just really have some sort of a head of state who wasn't the Queen but was an Australian operating. But that split the vote three ways. But part of the issue lay in the fact that these were very well worked out models. People could understand very specifically what they meant, and enough people didn't like the model that was being proposed in all of its detail. And so people reflecting on that said, going forward, if they were Republican, if they wanted to see a republic come up, they were proposing that the first question should be asked, do you want a republic, without details, to try to establish the principle that a majority want a republic, and then debate the detail about what sort of republic. Now, I think there's a similar line of reasoning occurring with The Voice, the idea being, get in principle support for The Voice from a majority and then debate the details. Now, you can understand why people who want The Voice will think that that is going to be an effective means to achieve the goal. But what I find really striking is, having studied really closely the making of the Australian Constitution, was the detail to which the framers of the Constitution went. We often talk about making the American Constitution as a wonderful example, but the convention at Philadelphia was held behind closed doors, and the delegates were sworn to secrecy, and the public didn't know what they were debating or arguing. It was only later that it was all revealed what they were saying amongst themselves. Whereas in Australia, we had an open debate. We had delegates elected directly by the voters at the second convention held in 1897-98 in each of the states, except for Queensland that didn't go. And the convention was held publicly. There was a Hansard record of the debates, and the Australian community had this opportunity, and the people in the different colonies, to know exactly what was being proposed. But the statesmen who led the process of federating recognised we need to take the full picture to the people and convince the people on the merits of the case that this was the appropriate model to federate on. Now, they could have taken the approach of, no, we won't take the detail to the people, we'll just give them a more vague idea about a sort of federation and say, we'll sort out the details. They didn't take that approach. And it's actually one of the reasons why I think our Constitution has been so successful, is that it has profoundly deep roots of consensus across the country, because it was such an open process and voters in each of the colonies had a say. And yes, there were some points on which they couldn't agree and they left things open. I mean, inevitably it's a question of degree about how much detail and how much not, but they were prepared to put forward a very detailed model, the entire Constitution Act. See, in Canada, when they made their constitution, really what the people got a chance to vote on was a set of general resolutions that described the general principles. Now, there were 72 resolutions, I think, if I recall correctly. They're quite a lot of detail, but still resolutions. The Australians had the actual act that was going to be enacted by the British Parliament with all of its detail. And so when Australians voted on whether they wanted to federate, they looked at the Act and said, yes or no, we want to federate on that basis. And that deep consensus, that was the foundation of the Constitution, going back to your initial question, is one of the deep reasons why I think we've been such a stable democracy. And that's a contrast with what's being proposed here with the voice, it has to be said.
And I should state I think many will know that my position is that we should be extraordinarily reluctant to change the Constitution. It should be totally blind to where you live in Australia, your gender, your age, your wealth, your position in the land, or the colour of your skin. So to put it there, I have a real problem there. And in as much as there are a couple of very modest race-based provisions in the Constitution now, I personally would rather we had perhaps even a new constitutional convention of some sort and sought to remove them. Because I just think critical to the principle of a really flourishing democracy is that we are obliged to fully recognise the equal equality of all Australians. No one's above the law, no one's below it, no one's left behind in the Constitution, no one has a privileged position. So I'm not against recognition, but that's where I come from constitutionally.